A little bit about CMSWire. It was founded in 2003. It publishes a wide variety of contributors on topics including digital customer experience, the digital workplace, and information management. And it has monthly tweet jams, hangouts, and webinars such as this. And I'm also pleased to say that today's speaker is one of our contributors who I have had the pleasure of working with for many years. A little bit about our Lunchbox series. Our Lunchbox series are editorially driven webinars that we are putting out on topics that are important to you, our audience. So we hope that these resonate for you, and let us know if so. Once again, I am Siobhan Fagan. I am the managing editor of CMSWire, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our presenter, Sam Marshall. He is the founder of Clearbox Consulting, and I am now going to let him tell you a little bit more about himself. Take it away, Sam.
Thank you very much, Siobhan, and thank you everybody that's tuned into this. It's a great pleasure to be part of this Lunchbox series with CMSWire. So, as you can see, I brought photo ID, and I'm based in the UK. I run a consultancy called Clearbox. And at Clearbox, we're very much focused on the people side of technology, and we do a lot of work around digital workplace and intranet strategy. One of the things that we're known for in the SharePoint space is that we do a quarterly report called SharePoint Intranets in a Box. We don't sell any tools or products that sit on top of SharePoint ourselves, but that neutral position allows us to be evaluators of lots of the really good offerings in this space and put together like a buyer's guide with its ratings of strengths and weaknesses of the different products. And some of that process that we go through in terms of saying what can SharePoint do and what do you need to add on top is the basis of what I'm going to take you through today in this webinar. Think about how far you can go with standard SharePoint and maybe some of the bumps that you might hit along the way. But look, what it often comes down to, and what people say to me a great deal these days is, can you build an intranet on modern SharePoint? And consultants, you know, they have a bit of a bad reputation for you ask them a straightforward question and they give you a really long and complicated answer that begins with, it depends, and ends with a very large bill. So let me try and buck that trend and make it really black and white. Can you build an intranet on modern SharePoint? Yes. But, you see, the thing is, we've always been able to build intranets on SharePoint. Way back when it was SharePoint 2003, we were building intranets. But the challenge was that people would start with this wonderful vision of how the intranet was going to look, and it proved so technically complicated to wrestle SharePoint to the ground where the point it was delivering something that was even approximately close, ended up with a lot of cost and often projects that could last 18, even 24 months. And it's almost like at the end of it that there'd be no time left to do what makes an intranet great and think around content and adoption and the launch and stuff. So really the question is, can you build an intranet on modern SharePoint without code? Can you skip that complex coding part? And the answer is yes, possibly. Because see, the thing is that even without code, there's a lot of things that require quite deep technical know-how about how SharePoint works. A lot around the configuration and so on. And although it's possible not to write code, it's probably beyond someone who comes at an intranet from, say, an intranet manager point of view. You still need quite specialist knowledge. So really the question is, can you build an intranet on modern SharePoint without code or prescription drugs? And the answer is absolutely, it depends. Because if it was just yes, this will be a very short webinar. What does it depend on? Well, too long didn't read. There's a post that we put a link to that I did on CMSWire about 3-4 months ago, which included this chart. And the way to view this chart is that the orange bars are typical things that people want an intranet to do that SharePoint out of the box quite easily can also do. The pale orange bars are things that Microsoft has said are on their roadmap that you might reasonably expect to become available in the course of the next 6 months or so. But then the blue bars are things where you're either looking at doing some kind of custom development, or you might be better off buying one of these add-on products. And I'm talking about things like Valo and Powell and Akamina. You know, there's probably about 80 products that do this kind of thing. And the dark blue bars are one that are even not common if you buy the product, so that you can kind of read this as quite hard to achieve. So the question of whether you can build an intranet in SharePoint really comes down to how far do you want to go along the space of those orange bars and into the blue bar territory before you hit some road bumps. Before I get into the SharePoint side of things, I just want to take a moment to talk about intranets and what they mean within a digital workplace. Another post that I did for CMSWire last year was a meta-analysis of everything we've heard from all the internal research we've done with clients over the last 6 years. So often when we're asked to do discovery pieces around developing an intranet strategy, we'll give employees, do like an all-employee survey. And over the 6 years, we collated 8,000 survey responses. And if you add up all the employees that work for all those various companies, that's about 400,000 employees. And also we got lots of qualitative data from over 300 focus groups. And what we did was we looked through that and said, well, what are the recurring themes? And it came down to 6 things, one of which really surprised me. The first one is that people say, look, I'm overloaded with information. I'm just getting like this fire hose of stuff coming at me. So paradoxically, the second one is that even though I've got all this information, the actual information that I need, the stuff that's really interesting, I just can't find that. It's buried somewhere in everything else. And often what people say is, I'm more interested in what's happening locally. So sure, you can tell me about the big strategy stuff and this marvelous merger and acquisition deal that you've done. Is that going to change what I'll do on the production line tomorrow? Probably not. So what I'm more interested in are things that are directly relevant to my job. The fourth one is, what am I supposed to use when? So particularly if you've got Office 365, employees are struggling with too much choice. Choice as a consumer is great because it's in your leisure time and you can, understand what your own needs are. Choice at work is often a very inefficient thing to do. And what you see in Office 365 is that sometimes when you just want to get a message out to the rest of the company, it can feel like you've got 6, 7, hey, here's Kaizala, here's the 8th way in which you can do that kind of thing. The next one is more about knowledge management. Who knows what we know? So employees have this intuitive sense that I work for an organization that's full of really clever people. How come I've got to figure this out? Surely someone has done it before, but I don't know the name of that person. So how do I connect with someone who can give me the answer or point me to the right document without knowing who they are? And the 6th one is the one that surprised me a bit. It ain't pretty. Employees feel really strongly when they have an intranet experience which is outdated, which looks rough around the edges. It sends out the same signal as if they walked into your office and the wallpaper was peeling off and the chairs were broken, and they interpret that as meaning, yeah, you know what, this company, the management, they don't really care about us. They don't want to give us a nice experience, they just want to give us a cheap experience. And of course that undermines a sense of employee engagement. We've got to remember that as employees work from home more, maybe they're on the road more, their touch points with our organization are increasingly the digital ones, and they know what good looks like in digital from the consumer experience. It's not so much that they come into your fancy offices as anywhere near as frequently as they used to do. So if we take those 6 things, what I'm going to talk you through in terms of what an intranet platform might do and what SharePoint might do for you are these: news and publishing, about the user experience, innovation with collaboration, knowledge management, the social side of stuff, good search and navigation, analytics and governance, so you can manage this in terms of making sure it's successful and monitoring it, and integration with the rest of the digital workplace. So it's really important that we recognize that SharePoint intranets are only one part of the employee's digital experience, and it shouldn't be an island. But before I get into that, we've got a poll question, so I'm going to hand back to Siobhan. Siobhan.
Thank you, Sam. So yes, it's pop quiz time for all of you in the audience. We would love to hear your thoughts on this question. What do you do to personalize your intranet to each user? You can choose one of the options directly on your screen, and the options are: we target news and other content to individuals. We let people configure what they want to see. We have different home pages for different user groups. Nothing, but we'd like to, or nothing, we don't need to. So Sam, I'm hoping that you can just talk a little bit more about why personalization in intranets is so important.
Yeah, so I mean, it goes back to that sense of there's so much information, but what I see isn't relevant. And personalization is one way to take a very complex experience, and let's face it, organizations often aren't necessarily complex, and make it navigable to the individual. And the great thing about intranets is that often we know a lot more about the user because they're logged in. We've got their Active Directory profile that says they're in this department and in this country. In websites, we can't do that so much. So it's a massive opportunity that often we're only just starting to exploit.
Mm-hmm. And in this case, personalization is actually helpful as opposed to creepy, which it can be sometimes on the consumer side. So it looks as if we've got our results. Pretty interesting. It's a close tie between nothing but we'd like to, and just behind that we have different home pages for different user groups. Did you have any thoughts on that, Sam?
Yeah, so I mean, different home pages for different user groups is a great way to get the basics right. But what you can only do then is really personalize along one dimension. So it might be on a country-by-country basis. And then when you overlay that and say, well, what about marketing people versus finance people, that model breaks down. So, I mean, it's great to see that 41% would like to do it, and it's definitely something that we are encouraging more people to do. The ones that say we don't need to, don't feel you have to do this if, for example, you're a chain of retail stores where everybody basically does the same thing. But for most organizations, it's a bit more complex than that. Okay, so let's get into those 6 dimensions that I talked about. And the first one I want to discuss is news and publishing. So the format for each of these sections looks a little bit like this. What you see in this table with the color coding is the kind of thing that we would do once we've got requirements from an organization. And we're saying, how easy is it going to be to achieve this with SharePoint? So easy to publish news. Is it possible? Yes, so that's a green light. Targeting news, there's some concerns. Subscribing to news topics, so the ability for the employee to say, I want to start tracking these 3 things is not really supported in SharePoint. News centers I come on to talk about, but that's the idea of like a publishing center for internal communication pros. Workflow controls, things like having a draft and authorizing it. Alerts are really common on our smartphones. The little circle with the number in it that says you've got 3 messages. Actually not that easy to do with an intranet. A mandatory read is popular in some organizations where, for example, they need an audit trail to say, we can prove that we sent out this health and safety notice to all employees and everybody's acknowledged that they've seen it. So let me illustrate some of those points. Easy publishing of news, that was the green one. I think modern SharePoint does a very good job of satisfying that requirement for most organizations now. What you get is an attractive user interface. You can kind of click edit and go in there and type. Very much what you see is what you get. It's a little bit like Medium. It's kind of light and fresh and not too complex. So no big concerns there. A little tip for you that you might not know about is that you can also not just add a news article if you look at this clipping on the right, but you can also add a news link. And what that does, a little bit like Twitter or LinkedIn, is it tries to pull in a headline and a thumbnail image from the destination link, say it's like a CNN story, and show that in an attractive way as well. And it looks very consistent with news stories that might be native to SharePoint. Subscribing to topics. So this is where the employee says, maybe I work in HR, but I'm the business partner to sales, so I want to see what's going on in sales. You can do it at the site level, so you can favorite the site. And when you go to the SharePoint start page, as it's called, it's called the SharePoint home, you will see news stories, but they're not very nicely presented, and they look almost identical to the site if you look at the row below. It's actually a little bit better and maybe more what you'd expect in the SharePoint app, which is what I'm showing you on the right, because what that's doing is pulling stories from different sites. So in the little green text above server currently down, it says operations, so that means it's coming from the operations site, and compliance, and another story from compliance. This is all driven by the user's choices. The third one is about managing news workflow and news publishing. So if you've ever had to make an announcement at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning and driven into the office to press that button at 8:55 on a Monday morning, you'll be really pleased about this, because what you can do very soon that Microsoft's rolling out is the ability to schedule a publishing time and date. Just bear in mind that there's no way at the moment to automatically unpublish or move something into an archive. So if you have like your Thanksgiving news story going out, it's going to stay there forevermore until you manually go in there and take it away after Thanksgiving. When it comes to workflow for page approvals, it's still pretty basic, but the good thing that not many people may be using so far is that you can switch on the use of Flow, or Power Automate as it's called now. And what happens when you switch that on for, say, the homepage news is that someone creating a new news article doesn't see publish anymore. If you look at the button on the right, it switches that to say submit for approval, and then it will send off an email and someone can approve that through there. It's not massively sophisticated, but frankly, I find most people ask for an approval workflow, and 3 weeks later they switch it off again because everything's got stuck with the one person who never reads the email and clicks yes to get it working through the works. Now, when it comes to having a news center, what I mean is in a lot of organizations, what you want to do is see all the news articles that are maybe in draft and published and where they're published into. SharePoint doesn't quite work like that. It's great for saying everybody creates news out on the periphery. So if you look at the lower box on this, you might have a site for France, one for sales, and one for finance. And you can use hub sites as a way to pull things up to an aggregate level. So for employees, that's good because then they can go to the hub site and they can say, oh, something interesting is happening in France, or something interesting is happening in sales, and then go into that site to see more stuff. And that bit's all well and good, and the way to do it is either through a hub site, as I've just shown you, or actually you don't need a hub site. You can just use a news web pass. And if you look at the right-hand side of this screenshot, what I've done in the panel is configure it to say, I only want you to pull storage from selected sites. So here we're saying compliance, facilities, and estates. And then whenever something gets published in compliance, facilities, or estates, it will aggregate that into the news web part that you see on the left. What you can also do is go a little bit further and use audience targeting. So again, something being rolled out now. What audience targeting does is actually hide things from people who are outside a group. So at the top here, you see we've got a news article web pass about our expansion into the north. And what we need to do, first of all, is enable an audience targeting. So that's the click button on the left. And then on the right, we're writing this story called Our Expansion into the North. And you can see that we set the audience to be leadership team members. So that's an Active Directory group. And what it means is that only people who are in leadership team members as a group will see that story about our expansion into the north in that web pass. But the reason I talk about it being selectively hiding is that if someone clicks on See All in that web pass, they will see our expansion into the north no matter what group they're in. So it's not security, it's just kind of a little bit of masking. And it will get you so far, but if you've got lots of groups, it can get quite complicated. The other way in which you often approach news in an intranet is the centralized news center. So particularly if you worked on like a web CMS, it's more common to say, we've got a whole bunch of articles and some are tagged as France and some as Spain and some as finance. And what we want to do from that central pool of news is push things out. And it may be that one story is going to appear both on Spain and finance because it's about doing deals in Spain, but everybody in finance would like to see it. This isn't impossible in standard SharePoint, but you're definitely now in the territory of needing to understand a lot about how search scopes work and how the search web parts work in order to make that happen. It's not a few clicks that you could do just as an intranet manager. The last thing I mentioned in the news and publishing domain was about alerts. So for like operational communications, this is a really common request that we come across for a lot of companies. And it's that ability to say, hey, there's going to be a fire drill today, or the car park is really icy, watch out, or if you're traveling to this office, just be aware that part of it is closed down for refurbishment. So you can't do that natively within SharePoint, but a lot of the add-on products do this if it's important to you. To pick one example, this is Fresh from a UK company, Content and Code. On the right-hand side, you can see how it looks in the mobile app. And what's nice is that not only do you see the alerts, which will appear on the lock screen of your phone, but also you can mark it as red to make it go away. As an administrator, you can have different categories of alerts targeted to different groups. The next section is all about user experience, so that ain't pretty gripe that we hear. And what I want to highlight here for you are three things that come up again and again. So one is about flexibility of branding, the ability to make your intranet really kind of express what your organization's about. Multilanguage support, even if you're headquartered in North America, often you've got different branches that want to talk in local language for their business. And of course, the importance of a rich mobile experience. So standard SharePoint is kind of middle ground when it comes to how it performs on this. If we start with branding, so probably if you're using standard SharePoint, your intranet landing page will now be, or very soon will be, a home site. This is something that Microsoft started rolling out in December and is going live across tenants throughout this month. And the idea of the home site is that it gives you the kind of thing that we would normally expect to see from an intranet start page with a menu and so on. But your branding options are a little bit limited. So you've really got three areas that you can brand. At the very top of Office 365 is what they call the suite bar. So you could put your company logo and colors into that. And what's great is that it's not just SharePoint where users would see that, but also in things like OneDrive as well. The next tier down is that for the hub site, you can apply colors and put an icon around the hub site name, and that would give it a little bit of a feel. And one of the things that hub sites do is then cascade that branding to every site that's associated with the hub. The problem is that you probably want to use more than one hub site, and if you want to ensure consistency of the brand across multiple hub sites, you then get into trickier stuff like site design scripting and PMP provisioning to apply all that. And the third option, a good manual one, is that you can also always use on-page branding. So just think about the images that you choose and whether they're consistent with your brand. Not everything has to have your company logo in it, but if you're a charity to do with nature, then of course mountains and scenery and animals and things should feature very prominently in the images that you pick. There's a link there. I know it's a little bit hard to read, but Bob German, who is a Microsoft employee, did a really frank blog post about what you can and can't do with branding, even down to saying, yeah, you can do this, I don't recommend it because it might break, but a lot of people do. Next, we talked about multilingual. So SharePoint, by the middle of this year, I guess we'll be about halfway when it comes to multilingual. Right now, it doesn't do anything. And it used to be, as soon as I had a client that said, we need to deal with multiple languages, I say, okay, well, it's a no-brainer that you need an intranet-in-a-box product to help you do that. What they've announced is basically page versioning. So the idea is if you look in the top left, there's a page in Spanish, and you can create a parallel version in English, and when the user goes to the language drop-down, it would switch to the English equivalent. And to help content owners keep track of that, every time the Spanish version changes, the page owner would see highlights of the words that have changed so they can retranslate them. So it's a kind of tracking tool. But just to be absolutely clear, this is not machine translation. There is actually no translation process happening. So it's not necessarily even that you're doing it from Spanish to English. You could do one version for New York workers and one version for Wisconsin workers, just because maybe they got different employment conditions state by state, but they both be in English. If you need machine translation, then yes, you do still need an intranet in a box. So here's an example from Acumina. Quite a few of the leading packages do this kind of thing. What we see on the left is a machine translation. So it sends your text off to Microsoft Cognitive Services, and it brings it back in as a rough cut translation in another language. What's nice about Acumina's approach is that you can see the little blue checkbox on the right saying sync scroll bar. So as you move through the source Spanish article, you can see the equivalent paragraph of the English article. So it makes it super easy to tidy up that rough translation. And we also talked about mobile. So on a mobile intranet, you've got a choice of either using the SharePoint app, which is going to get better once you've got home site, because the button on the SharePoint app that says home will take you to the home site rather than to that random machine pick list of news from the various sites. Or you can always go for the no app approach. If you're purely using modern pages, and these all work very nicely as responsive pages that will shrink down to a mobile smartphone screen size. But just bear in mind, because now it's really easy to put loads of web parts on a SharePoint page, it becomes tempting to create very complex pages. And what happens when you take all those web parts and stack them up into a long vertical page that you need for a mobile display is that people will be scrolling and scrolling and scrolling before they ever get to the bottom. If you're in that situation, what you ideally have is adaptive design, and that's not something that SharePoint does, but that's the ability to say, okay, on a desktop, include the weather widget, but if it's on a smartphone, drop the weather widget, or if it's on a desktop, show really big images. If it's on a smartphone, just show the text summary. Next up, we have collaboration, KM, and social. So on this one, the wish list is document and team collaboration. Can SharePoint do this? Oh, absolutely yes. This is bread and butter for SharePoint. It's been doing it for years, and of course now we've got Teams on top, so everything's honky-dory there. However, Microsoft are also making it really easy to fire up more and more collaboration spaces, and that is creating some things that are a little bit challenging for employees. The social side of things, so when Facebook and so on first came along, everybody talked about the social intranet has been a new thing, and we need to bear in mind that maybe SharePoint isn't leading in this. And online communities, so if you want like standalone communities of practice or communities of interest, and you're happy to use Yammer, then I think you're good to go with that. But just bear in mind that in some parts of the world, particularly like Germany, they're really not keen on using US-hosted Yammer cloud for this service. And it's only in the last few months that Microsoft has said, if you create a new Yammer network, you now have the option to do it in a more local data center. If you're thinking, oh, great, we've already got a Yammer network and now we can roll it out in that country that's always been a pain in the behind, actually, no, you can't. It's only new networks that can be set up that way. Sorry, guys. So what are we talking about? Well, collaboration around documents. I think we need to recognize that Teams has now overtaken SharePoint team sites, if I can keep saying Teams in a consistent way here. So Teams is the doorway into collaboration now. It's probably the start point. Even if you just want to look at a document, you probably go into the relevant team, go past all the chat and the GIFs and so on, and get to your documents. But I would say SharePoint still has a role in terms of its flexibility for delivering content. So the downside of Teams is that the navigation, the information architecture is really quite primitive. It can become overwhelming once you maybe got 20 teams in there to structure things, and what people start doing is uploading PDFs as a way to give a page that's navigable. What I'm showing you here then is the addition of a SharePoint page as a tab within a team. And actually this is a real thing that we do when we write our SharePoint reports, is that we have a page for all our authors, all our freelance authors, where we can add in links to a few of the relevant documents. We put in the timelines just as a text web part, and below that the whole process flow is a preview of a PowerPoint slide. So you get more control over layouts, and you can create a much more visual experience by using SharePoint pages within Teams. So I said that we're getting more and more collaboration spaces fired up, because in most cases it's just a one-click thing to say fire up a new team, and that fires up a new SharePoint site. Although that's great if you live in Teams and you're comfortable with that, it's not so great if you're, for example, a frontline worker who doesn't normally go into collaboration spaces at all. And for them, maybe they just want to download a template for a purchase order, and they'd be quite intimidated by the request that, well, you've got to install Microsoft Teams before you can do any of that. it would be more natural then for them to go to a page on the intranet and see a list of all the teams that they have access to. The good news is that one of the things that's coming is a right-hand pane within SharePoint where you can add a web part that lists all the sites that you're a member of as a personalized list. So that's really handy. But you've got a catch-22 because you might not be a member of that site that contains the document that you want. So this is where there is a bit of a gap. And some of the inner-box products fill it nicely by having like a navigation panel, not just of sites that you belong to, but also other sites that exist that you might have to request to get access to. So this is Valo. They have an add-on called Teamwork, and each of the tiles is showing a team that this person is a member of. But look above. You can search for sites. You can filter it so it might pull together groups and teams and SharePoint team sites and Yammer groups all into one directory. And if you look on the right-hand side with the little 3 dots, you can then jump to a specific type. So it might be, take me directly to the planner that's associated with this team. Social. Okay, so look, if you look outside the SharePoint world, a lot of the intranet alternatives do a much better job of integrating social. I'm thinking, for example, of if the CEO is mentioned in a news article and lots of people start commenting on it and the CEO joins in, then those comments should be part of the same conversation that would exist within communities or within the other discussion forums. But Microsoft has never done that level of integration. If I create a news story and allow comments on the bottom of it in a SharePoint page, those comments have got nothing to do with any other social activity. They're not, for example, part of Yammer. They can be. It's not too hard, I understand, but some of the Internet in-a-Box products enable that so that the comments are actually part of a Yammer feed. And then you will get notifications that the CEO had replied or that someone that you know posts interesting stuff within your company has commented on it. What you can do, though, that's quite nice is embed Yammer web parts within a SharePoint page. And that allows you to power up some of those pages to make them a little bit more interactive. So in this example, we've got a brand guidelines page. Imagine it's part of the policy and governance section about how you can use a corporate brand. What you can do is embed a Yammer web part that makes it a little bit like a Q&A box, and have people in the brand team answer questions like, where do I get the Pantone colors, or what are the dimensions for a banner that I want to commission? And everybody else gets to see that conversation in context of the guidelines and understands what the answers are. Yammer's had an interface overhaul that's going to be rolled out shortly, and the new web parts look even better. They look even more like a native part of SharePoint, so we're good there. Fourth one is search and navigation. So for this, the common requirements are the ability to search across the whole enterprise, not just an intranet or even all of Office 365, but the whole enterprise. The ability to find and browse reference information. So say, for example, you want a library of all the policies. I would say SharePoint does that well, no big concerns there. The ability to find people, which kind of works. I'll come on to that. And the ability to navigate in a consistent way across all sites, which is quite limited. I'll come on to that too. But first, searching across the whole organization. Up until very recently, SharePoint search, as it was, existed in its own kind of little world. And what's been rolled out is Microsoft Search, which at least extends the search results into things like Yammer and other sources within the Office 365 tenant. But what's still missing is the fact that often you have, for example, HR policies in SuccessFactors, or you have useful templates in ServiceNow, or records about customers in Salesforce. How do you get to those? Well, for that, you needed a true enterprise search. And what we're going to be seeing this year are more connectors coming that allow you to at least start indexing these non-Microsoft sources. So here's an example of search results from ServiceNow, which is great, but I keep saying but a lot in this presentation, but it's presenting it as a separate search vertical. And that's a little bit like going to Expedia and searching for a hotel, and Expedia saying, okay, yeah, here's all the results that we have from Hilton hotels. And then click on another tab to see all the results from Best Western hotels. And that's not really what we want. We just say, look, now give me the 3, 4 best hotels. I don't really care where they come from. So there's still work to be done there. When it comes to people search, so basic people information, names, contact numbers, and so on in the top right, that works really nicely. But when we don't know a name, but we want to find a person by other attributes, such as their location and department, we want a Russian-speaking JavaScript specialist based in France. How do you do that? That's when you need more complex filters. And you can either build it yourself, for sure, or many of the Internet-in-a-Box products do this, a much better job of this, ready to run. Now, on the navigation side, so within SharePoint, you can do Megamenus now, which are quite attractive. Just be aware that you can do it in multiple tiers, which is a bit odd. I've never seen a website that has Megamenus both at like the top link level and at the site level. But if the scope also to do that well. But in most intranets, what we really want is a whole kind of site-wide navigation experience where the menu persists no matter where you go. And that's really hard to achieve. You have a couple of options. One is that you make a hub site your home site. And then all the sites for the departments associated with it will inherit the same navigation. But then all your team sites would have to be like direct links or part of that personalized link navigation. They wouldn't get that top-level menu bar. Or you can say the home site will have unique navigation, and then each hub site with its associated teams, they will have like a locally consistent navigation. So you could be like everything in finance, all those teams would see the same persistent finance navigation. What you can't do is this. You can't have hubs that belong to other hubs that are nested hubs. Recently, Microsoft said, yeah, we know this is a problem. We're looking at the possibility of a hub of hubs. I thought, oh, that sounds great, as well as hub of hub being quite a nice thing to say. But it only works for aggregating news. It's not going to be that somehow this fixes navigation problem. The fifth one is around analytics and governance. So for this, what we're really looking for is both the ability to understand how content's behaving and how users are behaving. SharePoint and Office 365 is pretty good at telling us who's using tools, that tools are being used. It's pretty good at telling you some of the active pages and document areas. But what it doesn't tell you is whether you're engaging with different departments. Frankly, I think what Microsoft are really doing is saying, look at how much you're using your licenses and please renew next month, Mr. Customer, rather than give you insights into saying, you know, that last communication campaign we did, it was really well received by people in sales, but for people in commercial, it really didn't go down that well. We need to rethink how we engage with people in commercial. There are third-party options. So a lot of our customers use Google Analytics. A lot of our other customers don't trust Google and would never give them any data. I can't imagine why. So they might use something like Matamo, which is an open source equivalent to Google Analytics, and you can install it on your own servers or your own tenants. Or if they've got web trends for their website, they may well extend the license to use it for their intranet as well. Other options are to use the SharePoint-specific tools, so Cardiolog, HairPoint, Trian. They'll do a much more comprehensive job. And if you're interested in the social and sentiment side, then Tygraph and Swoop are worth a look. The last section is about digital workplace integration. So this is recognizing that intranets don't exist in isolation, but often we want to pull data in from other systems, that we want maybe a central point where we can see all of the different notifications going on. So we've got like a sense of where do I need to focus my interest first. What's good is that we've got loads of connectivity across Office 365 from like web parts that will hook into GitHub and Power App connectors that will go into Jira and Blogspot and Asana. And within Teams, you can add a chatbot that will replace an email notification about your expenses with a chatbot that says, here's your expenses. But unfortunately, all of these tend to just kind of give you a readout, and to do anything with it, you're still clicking a link and going somewhere else. What we should be hoping for are things that bring the action into the intranet interface. So one of the articles I did last year was about microservices, and I highlighted a couple of his examples. Wells Fargo, for example, the internet homepage looks pretty standard. But they have a secret superpower, which is when you click on the right-hand side, there's a button marked Notifications. And that tells you things that you need to deal with across the request center, across the time tracker, from lots of different sources. Another company doing this really well is Liberty Mutual. So here you can see the time off widget. And all you're doing is booking time off. In the head of an employee, that should be really straightforward. But unfortunately, behind the scenes, it's calling on Active Directory, on ADP, on ServiceNow, and Office 365. What they've done is take away all that complexity from the employee and keep the user interface super simple and deal with it behind the scenes. On the right-hand side, there's a mobile app you can see within Navit Travel. To approve the expense, you just click Approve. You don't actually have to go into the travel app at all to do that. So the fundamental question, having gone through all that, is should we build it, should we buy it, or should we wait? And I think for the last 3 years, Siobhan has entertained me by editing articles with the same topic, more or less, about SharePoint. So to understand a little bit about the Internet in a Box marketplace, it's important to get to grips with that they are not all doing the same thing. Some of them are proper ready-to-run products. And you can tell that because the vendors will install them within like 6 hours or less than a day. Some of them are more like accelerators. So these are agencies that have got a big code library, and you certainly benefit from reusing that code library, but you're still looking at several weeks or months to develop it. Some of them are applications that don't work within SharePoint at all, but operate separately and talk to SharePoint data. So Unity is very famous for doing this, but actually news stories don't even necessarily live within SharePoint, they live within their own content management system. And lastly, there are frameworks that are a little bit of an in-between between ready-to-run and accelerators, where you can have a basic intranet within a matter of hours, but also you can adjust the components. So if you want to say, we like 80% of it, but we want a couple of things a little bit different, then frameworks give you that flexibility to extend beyond the standard product. In a nutshell, the reason why we see people going for in-a-box products are basically all the shortcomings that I've gone through. So they want better, consistent menus. They want a mega menu that persists across different places. Maybe they want some basic services like room booking and event management built in. Maybe they want more centralized content management like that news hub, or centralized collaboration governance so I can see all the sites that I belong to. But there's a couple of other things to bear in mind, which is that Microsoft is moving really fast. And in the past, companies have found it very hard to keep their internet technology at the right pace with Microsoft, because Microsoft's got all these big resources. By going to an in-a-box product, what you're doing is sharing that burden of keeping things up to date with potentially hundreds, sometimes even thousands of other customers. So it's down to the vendor to keep up to date, which is great. But it's not always that black and white, because on the other side, if you build it yourself and you're a very large organization, that might work out cheaper than a per-user, per-month licensing model. It might give you more flexibility to do exactly what you want, rather than, for example, having to keep step with changes that the vendor is introducing. But to me, often what I say is, look, if you believe that your intranet is delivering big value to your company, surely the best thing to do is to roll out that new intranet as soon as you can. And 9 times out of 10, the fastest way to do that is going to be to buy a product as a quick start and then customize it to what you need. So in summary, what we've gone through are 6 different dimensions for what an intranet might do. What you need to do if you're interested in this space is figure out which ones are most important for you. How far do you want to go along these different orange bars? Because that will give you the answers to, can we build this just using modern SharePoint, or are we going to be compromising what we can do? And if we want to do more, is it better to buy it, or is it maybe better to wait for all this good stuff that's coming along? So I'm going to stop there and hand back to Siobhan, but those are my contact details. I'm always happy to talk intranets to people if you want to follow up with me. Siobhan.
Thank you, Sam, and please take a breath after all that. That was quite a bit of information you just shared with us. So thank you so much for that presentation. And now we want to hear from you, our audience. We will put Sam on the spot again, but please send any questions that you have for him. He brought up so many different areas. Let us know what you need from your intranet. Ask his advice. He's here for you. So use the Q&A module at the bottom left of your browser to submit your questions. And if you just have a comment or want to discuss this webinar, tweet us at CMSWire and at Sam. I can attest that Sam is very responsive on Twitter. So Sam, now that I've given you all of about a 30-second break, I am going to dive into our first question. This question is, do we still need intranets when everyone is going over to Teams?
And immediately I want to go into consultant mode and say, it depends, Siobhan. do you know what? I mean, Teams is definitely the golden child at the moment. I can understand why people are very excited about Teams. We use it a lot in my company, and we do love using it. But I think there's also that role for the more structured information. People want to know that there's a source of the truth where maybe you can search, but maybe also you search to a certain point, like you get to a set of policies, and then you want to browse through what the options are, or maybe I want to see, I don't know what the employee benefits are. So how would I go into Teams and find that and search for what the benefits are if I don't know what I'm searching for? You want to see something which is a more visual presentation as a menu. And for that, the intranet still has a lot to offer. I do agree, though, that maybe the range of things that we ask an intranet to do is reduced once you've got Teams, and that's a good thing because Teams is optimized for a certain set of use cases.
That was actually, and it depends answer, but it was informative. I'll let you go with that.
All right, I'll be quicker next time.
No, I'm teasing. So the next question is, you mentioned, I don't even know how many you said. It was over 70 or over 80 in a box?
Sure. 80, yeah.
Wow. So do you expect to see this in-a-box market start to shrink?
Oh, boy, I hope so. Because this report we do, it's 600 pages, and our print said, look, we can't even bind it anymore. We're going to have to split it into two. And every time we go to a conference carrying these things, my shoulder starts aching. So for health and safety reasons, it needs to. But look, it is, to me, a very fragmented market. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if what people started doing is saying, we can't keep plowing resources into this race. We're better off becoming a reseller of one of the really mature products rather than trying to sustain our own. And from a buyer's point of view, so from an organization rolling out an intranet point of view, I think that's a good thing as well, that it consolidates into into bigger players who can really invest in doing innovation over and above what Microsoft offer.
Great. So our next question, this is more of a general question. Any tips on how to determine requirements for a new intranet?
Don't ask people what they want from an intranet. It's something I learned the hard way. No, I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but in a lot of organizations, employees have never even seen a different intranet. So it's not really fair for them to tell you what they want the intranet to do. But instead, you should have conversations with them about what their frustrations are on areas that we know intranets can help with. So ask questions like, when things change, do you hear about it in good time? What's your preferred way of getting updates about how the company is doing? When you need to find reference information, are you confident that what you found is the right answer, or do you feel like you get 7 or 8 hits, all of which might be possible ones, so you don't necessarily trust what you're seeing? And all of those are clues for you to take away and say, across our intranet, but also across the rest of maybe what we have in Office 365 and beyond, what's the best tool to meet those needs? And then what you're doing is kind of making design decisions about what's the purpose of the intranet for us versus what the other things can do. And then, of course, you've got the top-down requirements, which is more about, as an organization, how are we going to be changing? And to make the intranet really relevant, what does it need to support? And that might be, for example, if you've always worked in North America and you're going to be expanding into Latin America, then there are things that the intranet should be doing to help with that expansion around keeping people in touch and replicating good practice into new geographies.
Great. So our next question, we're moving at a fast clip here, Sam, but our next one is from Morton. And Morton asks, in an out-of-the-box platform, what is the most important SharePoint online feature that they should build upon or be loyal to?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Do you remember me saying that one of the few purely green boxes was around SharePoint Modern News? And I think that is always going to be part of an intranet. Even if you don't use it for corporate news because you need something fancier, there will be department or division news that, well, for people, it's just going to be the easiest thing to do is to create a standard modern SharePoint news page. So I'd always be loyal to that, to use your word. I'd always respect the fact that news will be created there and make sure you don't lose it. And what I mean by that is you don't want to create corporate news that works in one way and have all the other news segregated so that you can't get that nice employee experience of, can I see all the news that's relevant to me no matter where it comes from in my mobile app, for example.
Great. So next one is from Amy. And Amy wants to know if there are any golden rules when setting up a mega menu style navigation.
Yeah, so one of the things I was trying to say is that the purpose of mega menus is to make it really easy to browse your choices. Because if you've ever designed navigation and tried to come up with a word that means the same thing to everyone, you know you're on a loser's game. You know, you might call it something like resource and think, oh yeah, it's obvious what resources means, and then find that three people all interpret it in different ways. So mega menus in effect help you explain what you mean by that menu item. By the way, resources is a terrible name for a menu item. Explain what you mean by showing these are the 8 things that fit underneath that category. So they all need to be scannable. And by having mega menus, you should have subsections on the menu that maybe group things. So if you've got something around services, it might be services for employees, and then purchasing, and then technology services, and then options underneath that. And I was trying to steer people away from having 2 layers of mega menus because that makes it much harder to scan between the different options and get a sense of how can I eliminate these 3 and then focus my attention to scanning through this last mega menu, because that's where the thing that I'm really interested in, whether it's the lunch menu or how do I get a pay rise, has been deeply buried to make sure people find it.
I think a mega menu sounds like something that you're going to have at a monster truck rally, you know, where you have a lot of different options on what you can.
Supersize the mega menu.
So we're going to stick with another golden question. This one is from Soren. And Soren wants to know if you are a large company, for example, from 10 to 20,000 users, then the in-a-box often ends up being expensive, especially if you plan to keep your intranet for many years. So building web parts, other customizations have a cost, but not a monthly fee. Here's the golden part. What is the golden number of users for build versus buy in a box? Do you know that magic ratio, Sam?
Oh, God, I'm going to give the consultant answer again. It's okay, so no, I won't. As a rule of thumb, once you get over, I would say, about 400, 500 employees, you're probably going to hit a level of complexity that's hard to do with standard SharePoint as it works right now. The other factor, though, isn't just the number of users, but also the complexity of your organization. So remember I said if you're a retailer and you might have 1,000 or 5,000 people all working in exactly the same store, so the only thing that differentiates them is the town that those stores are in, you may well be fine with standard SharePoint because there isn't a lot of complexity there. But if you're a retailer and you do fast foods and you do business-to-business catering, then you've got more dimensions, even if you've only got 200 employees. And that's when things like navigation will become tricky and when good targeting will become more desirable. But Soren mentioned costs, and some of these products are per user per month, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are just a one-off fee, and there may be a 20% maintenance charge. So even if you got 20,000 users over 5 years, bear in mind that versus building it yourself, there's not only upfront costs, but you're also taking on total cost of ownership and maintenance costs throughout the other 4 years after you launch, keeping in step with changes that Microsoft make that may well have broken how you've done it in-house.
So I was actually hoping that you could talk a little bit more about that, Sam, with customization and how that works in light of the frequent updates that Microsoft rolls out. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Microsoft, although they're much clearer now about what you can do safely and what you can't, and in many ways restricted what you can do compared to classic SharePoint when we used to design publishing sites, they also have a habit of launching things and then losing interest, or launching things and then taking them away again. If you think, for example, about SharePoint Communities, which they launched just before they acquired Yammer, which is actually quite a nice social discussion forum thing, they put it out there and then it never changed, and now they said, no, it's not supported anymore, deprecated in Microsoft speak. So if you've been relying on those communities, you're a little bit high and dry. Whereas if you've gone with a product that relied on some of that technology, which Microsoft says it's taking away, then you can quite reasonably expect the vendor to come up with a transition path and maybe keep that solution working for you much longer.
Great. So we had a question about the scheduled page publishing feature, which you said is coming available soon. They're wondering if you have an inside scoop about when we can expect that feature to roll out from Microsoft, and if not, if you can recommend an in-the-box tool to use while we're waiting for that feature.
Okay, so do you think everybody listening to this will keep a secret?
Of course.
Hey, do you know what? I deliberately don't sign any NDAs with Microsoft because I always forget what I can and can't say, so anything I know must be in the public domain somewhere. I believe scheduled publishing is coming February or March to the early release tenants. So, by the end of this first quarter, you should have that. If that's all you need, I'd definitely wait. I wouldn't buy an in-a-box tool just to solve that need.
Great. So sit tight for a couple of months, and it should be here. You heard it here. But you don't tell anybody.
And elsewhere.
So our next question, it looks like we
go ahead, because I think we've got time for one more. Yeah.
Yeah?
So I can see one about multiple instances of SharePoint to the same database?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, okay, so that's going in hard.
Is it possible to point to multiple instances of SharePoint to the same database?
I've got to say that is quite a deep technical one, beyond my knowledge of having to do this, which is probably why I talk about the inner box side of things so much. I can go away and try and find an answer to that one and get back to the questioner, but I'm afraid off the top of my head, I suspect that's quite an involved answer.
There you go. You stumped Sam.
What a way to end.
So
Never mind.
No. This was all wonderful. And thank you all for all of your questions. We did record this webinar, and you will receive a link to the on-demand video in the next few business days. Thank you again, Sam, for speaking today and for sharing all of that information. And I just want to wish everybody a great day.